the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, they met Saturday, 2 days ago. And I believe this translation is correct that we translated, but the argument is that this invasion was necessary as a preemptive strike. It just, when I hear preemptive, because I'm old, I just remember, Condi Rice and Richard Pearl and what was it? Wolfstein? I can't even remember his name now. And of course, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all of them talking about you don't want the mushroom cloud to be you don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. And that's where the preventative or preemptive war. And here is Lukashenko saying, you had to do this, President Putin, because it was preventive. Let's play this.
We weren't the ones to attack them because the Ukrainian army started shelling. When I visited last time, we were sitting in a helicopter and we were getting those reports. So they were the ones who started. And I will show you now from where they prepared an attack, assault against Belarus. And if we didn't assault them preemptively, they would have assaulted our forces, Belarusian and Russian, who were part of the exercises. So we weren't the ones who started this assault. Our conscience is clear because look, biological weapons, the largest nuclear power station, power plant, and they were ready to blow it up. Now we see what's happening in Chernobyl. You ask me to give them power, and they don't even need this. They don't even think about that.
As far as your reporting, you're not omniscient. You were there. You had a sense of it. Like, what part of that is true?
None of it. None of it.
Fair enough.
Absolutely none of it. I mean, the Russian campaign to create a pretext to this war has been even lazier and more openly, transparently false than the U.S. campaign to create a run-up to create a pretext for the invasion of Iraq. Like,
I think,
yeah.
From my experience, the run-up to the Iraq War was like a year and a half long. I mean, it was there was a lot of effort put into this. A tremendous.
This was like an Iraq War speed run. It was basically like, it's absolutely absurd.
Give me a sense of what your take is on this bioweapon thing, because, I don't know that you would have necessarily any particular insights, but were you aware, at the very least, of that this was one of the casus bellis? I'm saying this wrong, but one of the reasons why. Putin went on and gave a speech as to why they were about to invade or why they had begun to invade Ukraine. It dealt with, denazification. It dealt with corruption. It dealt with, a return, NATO threats. It dealt with a reconstituting of Russian Empire. Ukraine didn't really exist, et cetera, et cetera. Had you heard anything about? We also have to go in there because of the bioweapons that they're developing.
No, I mean that was a new one. That's a new one that's cropped up in recent days. It's interesting. So some of the pretext to war that they gave had been like sort of long running conspiracy theories. I wrote about them in a piece for Rolling Stone before the war, actually. But there's all this stuff about like Russian genocide and things like that. And then they're like new investigations into like mass graves in Donetsk and Luhansk and stuff like that. And I didn't see those graves. That was like, I think a few months before I got there, but I spoke to a bunch of journalists that I knew that were out there and stuff. One especially, it's in that Rolling Stone piece, who had like been in the area where this sort of like conspiracy fomented, which was basically, it was a town in the early days of the war that was shelled, I think by both sides, or it was shelled by one side and then the other side, and it eventually came under like separatist control. And basically power had been knocked out for the entire town. There were all these bodies in the morgue, but no refrigeration. And so the local authorities, which at the time were the separatists, like buried them in a large mass grave outside. And then what they've done years later is like the Russian government, which knew through its separatist proxies that this grave was there, have said, we're opening up an investigation into this mass grave. It's going to prove like Ukrainian genocide, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like journalists who had been there at the time were like, everyone knew about this. This was exactly the situation that had happened. Like this is a completely, empty pretext. So there were some of these conspiracies that they'd been talking about. And like the whole like Russian cultural genocide thing has been a running theme for the past 8 years. But this newer stuff like the biolabs and things, I had not heard anything of that before. I mean, what he's saying about the nuclear power plant, like that's the nuclear power plant down in Zaporizhia, which is south of Dnipro or whatever. It's like, it's a nuclear power plant. Like, I don't know. His justification is like the Ukrainians were planning to blow it up. They were planning to like do Chernobyl again to their own power plant. It just like, it's ludicrous. I don't see why
that would be like me heading up to Indian power plant just up the river on the Hudson River and saying, I'm going to show Canada a thing or two and, and blowing it up. And everyone I know, it gets radiation poisoning.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what they're alleging, basically. The biolabs thing, I don't know a huge amount about that, but I've seen some like really good sort of debunkings of that online from reputable sources. It appears that one of the main labs in question that they're talking about is up near the northeastern city of Kharkiv, where I was when the war started. And what it's basically, it was just like a biological research facility. We have them all over the place in the United States. They're in almost every country where, they're doing like research and they're handling sometimes certain pathogens and stuff like that. And I think the core of the conspiracy goes around that they were like destroying evidence or something like that. And it was all put down on paper. And then you have like actual, genetic and biological scientists saying like, no, what the paper is it's literal just documentation that these scientists, when the city got invaded, were like properly disposing of hazardous samples of material and stuff like that. So that you don't, someone doesn't crack a vial and then smallpox get. I don't think they had smallpox at that facility, but like Kharkiv, that whole area is like a massive university town. There's like 38 different universities there. There's medical schools. There's like, of course they would have those kind of labs up there. And like, maybe some of them got US funding at some point, but these are not like, it's not like weapons research labs. This was all like things that was like public and above board and like on paper. So it's spaghetti at the wall. And they're just throwing it to see what sticks.
Now, who is the audience here for this? Like when Lukashenko and Putin do this, and they are, generating obvious, fairly easily debunked lies by anybody who's on the ground and had access to a TV, I guess, or news. Who is the audience? Is it for Belarusians and Russians as a way of maintaining political, support or muting domestic dissent?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Because you hear from people, and I've spoken to Ukrainians who have family members in Russia, and especially now with this sort of recent purge of independent media outlets and stuff like that in Russia. But to a certain extent, it's basically Russia's media ecosystem is if an entire country only had access to like Fox News and Newsmax or whatever, and Trump were still in power and he fully controlled the agendas of all those networks, right? So it's if every single person in this country, the only news source that they had access to were like essentially state-owned and tools of the state that were feeding them a steady stream of disinformation and whatever. And I know there are watchers that are like, well, the the U.S. news networks do propaganda and stuff like that on this. It's not even close to the same level. Like, I've spoken to people who were being bombed in Ukraine who were like on the phone with relatives in Russia, and their relatives were being like, "We don't believe you. Like, we're like, it's not actually happening," you know. So all of this is to just keep those societal controls in place in these respective dictators' constituencies.
Right. I mean, I think this is an important point to make. Like, I don't think it's right for YouTube to be pulling down shows that are, you know, offering a different opinion on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and particularly ones that are, you know, sort of, frankly, are smaller in some regard. I don't, you know, I think we have a problem with YouTube. With it. I don't want to go back in, you know, I don't want to relitigate that. But people should understand that when we say that that's problematic, it is not to, there is no comparison. It is maybe a way of saying, like, if this gets 20 times worse or 100 times worse, it could look like something like what's actually ongoing in Russia. I mean, we're watching footage of people holding up blank signs in Moscow, literally a sign that just says, like, nothing, and immediately getting arrested for holding up a sign. So the people should be aware of that. All right. So with that said, let's talk about, from your perspective, like, there's a real tension here, right? And we're seeing these images. We're watching people get bombed. A maternity ward in Mariupol, pregnant women being killed, which, again, I also, I hope that we can learn from this and develop some empathy that we can also apply to other conflicts, that ones in which we have actually, more direct influence, frankly. But what do you think the U.S. response and the NATO response has been so far? And talk about that tension from what I would imagine the Ukrainians you were reporting on felt relative to the perspective that you have as an outsider.
Yeah. So, I've tried to put this into words before, but it's, when you speak to people in Ukraine, they want immediate NATO involvement. They want a no-fly zone. They want the West to join the war against Russia. In their perspective and in their opinion, World War III is already happening. And the only difference between the two outcomes is whether or not the West gets involved while there are still Ukrainians alive, or whether the West gets involved after Ukraine has been essentially wiped off the map and it's Poland next. That is their perspective. And it's very easy to see how they get that perspective, because they're being cluster bombed and artillery struck and massacred every single day. I think it's tough as an outsider. I don't really have anything that I can say to those people that makes it better when you speak to them, like, in person. Like, there's nothing you can say. When you have the privilege of being able to take a step back from that, I think it's very clear to me and to a lot of people that immediate direct NATO involvement in this conflict would be absolutely catastrophic. And I think that there is still potentially a outcome to this that does not involve a wider war between Russia and NATO powers. I think we also sort of owe it to ourselves and to the Ukrainian people to be clear about what that means. And what that means is that they're going to die. And we're going to watch that happen. And I think the Biden administration thus far has handled things about as well as they could have, at least since the war started. I think they've been smart to not do things like Obama did in Syria, to put red lines, to draw sort of arbitrary points in time when NATO involvement becomes secure. But I think also, like, as we're watching that happen, we need to be clear, like, whatever the US's role was in the lead up to this conflict, whatever, and I honestly think this war was going to happen regardless of what NATO did in the build up to this. I think this war it's very clear that this is what Putin, who has now totalitarian control over the Russian state, what he wanted. But I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves that all of the diplomatic mistakes that 3 administrations, for as far back as you want to go, of elected leaders in the US have made, have contributed to the situation that we see right now. And that in some respect, all of the death that is going to happen, part of that blood is on our hands. It's of course overwhelmingly more so on Vladimir Putin's hands. It was his decision to invade. I honestly am not sure in the past 5-10 years even what the West could have done to prevent that. But we're actors in this situation as well. And so
we should say, I mean, I think it's important to say that for those people who say, like, now is not the time to mention this, people should know that, like, this critique about the expansion of NATO has been ongoing since prior to the expansion of NATO. I mean, these are critiques. You can go back. You can look at Moynihan making this argument. Then there's a lot of things I don't like about Daniel Moynihan, but that this critique was out there since the early 90s, since the fall of the Soviet Union, and has been repeated through those years. So if this is the first time you're hearing this critique, it is because it's the first time that we're actually paying attention to it. And so, I mean, I think it's important to because I think you're right. I think we're about to basically sit on the sidelines and watch a horror unfold that we do not have the ability to stop. The only thing that we have an ability to influence is how it metastasizes.